The world often feels so fragmented, especially right now. But sometimes global events really shine a light on these hidden threads, these connections between struggles you might not expect. Today, we're pulling on one of those threads in this deep dive. It's about the profound and long-standing solidarity between Black Americans and Palestinians. For many, it might even seem surprising.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to unpack why. Why does this powerful kinship exist? We're going to dig into the history, the social links, the political layers,
Yeah.
all the things that have woven these two struggles together over time. We'll look at the impact, past and present, but sticking strictly to the information we've gathered from our sources for you today.
And that's crucial. This isn't about us taking sides or pushing a viewpoint, not at all. It's really about looking hard at the source material, understanding the human connections, the shared stories that come through. So the question is, how deep do these threads actually run? Let's start there with those experiences.
Okay, so when you really dig into this solidarity, the thing that just jumps out from the sources is this shared experience of systemic oppression, of trauma even. It's not just academic, right? It's this immediate, almost gut-level recognition, especially for a growing number of Black Americans looking at the West Bank, at Gaza,
Yeah.
seeing parallels to their own history.
Yes, exactly. And the sources, they're full of these really powerful personal stories that illustrate it. Take Sadie Wallace. She's a Black Jewish community activist. She took a trip to Israel and the West Bank.
Well,
And she said afterward she was just dismayed by her own kind of ignorance of the reality for Palestinians under occupation. Her reflection was, wow. She said, being there made me wonder if this is what it was like to live in the Jim Crow era back in America.
that's incredibly direct. It is. And then there's Laron L. Barton, a Black American writer. He talks about meeting Palestinians and hearing their stories.
Yeah.
Being stopped by soldiers, random arrests, attacks, homes ransacked. And he said it just resonated so deeply with his own life. His quote is, "Although our struggles are different, this is what growing up Black in America sounds like."
Wow. So it's not just like abstract similarities, it's these deeply felt echoes, a shared language of struggle almost that cuts across geography. What do the sources suggest is maybe the strongest point of recognition here? What element really clicks?
I think it's that visceral recognition you mentioned. Barton makes this really stark comparison. He talks about Black parents giving their kids the talk, about how the world sees them, the dangers.
The survival talk.
Exactly. And he parallels that with Palestinian parents teaching their children, as he put it, how to literally stay alive in places like Gaza and the West Bank. It's this idea of always being in survival mode, childhood denied, constantly navigating threats. And the sources are clear. Organizers see this solidarity precisely because, and this is a quote, both groups of people have suffered from racist policies. They draw a direct line from structural racism in the U.S. to the Israeli military occupation and its policies.
And it goes beyond the emotional parallels, doesn't it? The sources show similarities in the actual systems of control, like detainment.
Mm-hmm. That's another striking point. Julian Rose, an organizer with a Black-run bail fund in Atlanta, he drew this direct comparison. He pointed out how Black people are disproportionately locked up in the U.S., often without even being convicted of anything.
Right. Pre-trial detention.
Yeah, and he compared that to Israel's administrative detention policy, where people, Palestinians, can be held indefinitely, no charge, no trial, sometimes for things like throwing stones.
Yeah.
Human rights groups often criticize it for lacking due process.
Yeah. It's the mechanics of control being mirrored.
Exactly. And what's fascinating, too, is how symbols of loss and longing echo across these communities. It really speaks to that transgenerational trauma. Think about the Ada refugee camp near Bethlehem. There's this huge key there. It's a Palestinian symbol, right? For the homes they lost in 1948 during the Nakba, their catastrophe.
Signifying the right of return.
Precisely. And Camila Oseguera, who grew up in an African-American Muslim community, she described visiting the Door of No Return Memorial in Senegal for enslaved Africans. And she said it made her think about what the dream of my return would have meant for my ancestors. It highlights this, quote, longing that is transmitted through generations. Deep stuff.
It really is. And what makes this all the more compelling, as our sources show, is that this isn't just a recent thing. This solidarity, it has roots going way back, mid-20th century, woven into some really key historical moments.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't always the case, though. It's interesting. The sources note that initially, back in the 19th, early 20th centuries, many Black American activists actually admired the Zionist cause. They saw, parallels and oppressed people seeking a homeland. And of course, Jewish Americans were hugely important allies in the civil rights movement.
Okay, so there was that initial connection.
Right, but the sources show a definite shift after 1948, after the creation of Israel, the Nakba. Even early figures like Ralph Bunche, the Black American diplomat, UN mediator, he voiced concerns about Palestinians losing their land, being displaced.
Okay, so Bunch had reservations early on. But what really solidified this shift, this reevaluation within the Black liberation movement? When did the language around, say, settler colonialism start to emerge, according to the sources?
Well, the sources really point to Malcolm X as being pivotal here, just crucial. He's described as one of the first major African-American figures to openly back the Palestinian cause, and he explicitly called Zionism settler colonialism.
Wow, that's strong language for the time.
It was. And he felt strongly that Black Americans would naturally sympathize with the Arab cause. His trip to Gaza in 1964, that was apparently transformative. He saw the dire circumstances, as the sources put it, of displaced Palestinians, and that directly inspired his essay, Zionist Logic.
Okay, so Malcolm X is a key inflection point.
Definitely. And then the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, that was another crucial turning point.
Yeah.
This is when you see Black Power activists, groups like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
A major force in civil rights.
Huge. Them and the Black Panther Party, they started viewing Israel's occupation explicitly as another form of Western imperialism. They saw it as directly analogous to their fight against racial injustice in the U.S. SNCC actually described Zionism as an imperial project upheld by the white Western colonial governments. The Panthers saw Black Americans as internally colonized, and both groups as third world peoples fighting colonialism.
So it became part of a broader anti-imperialist framework. And these weren't just abstract ideas, right? Our sources mention concrete links.
Oh yeah, real on-the-ground stuff. Like in Detroit's auto plants, there was an Arab Workers Caucus, and it was modeled directly on Black caucuses already active there.
Interesting. Labor organizing.
Exactly. And they actually succeeded after the 1973 Yom Kippur War in pressuring their union, the UAW, to divest from Israeli state bonds. So international politics hitting the factory floor.
That's a fascinating example. And then Black political figures started bringing this into the mainstream.
Right. Building on that grassroots energy. Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress and to run for president, during her 1972 campaign, she recommended direct talks between Israel and Arab nations. Then fast forward to 1979, Andrew Young. He was Carter's UN ambassador. Big deal. He got pressured into resigning after he secretly met with a representative from the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization.
It must have caused a stir.
Huge stir. Sparked a lot of debate about, Black-Jewish relations potentially declining. But crucially, it also kind of forced a more pro-Palestinian viewpoint into the national conversation. Made it okay to discuss, maybe. And then Reverend Jesse Jackson really picked up that ball and ran with it. He led a delegation to the Middle East, met Yasser Arafat, pushed hard for the U.S. to negotiate with the PLO, and during his '88 presidential run, Jackson famously said, "We understand life under occupation because we've been occupied." He also specifically highlighted ties between Israel and apartheid South Africa at the time.
Drawing that direct parallel again, and this solidarity wasn't just U.S.-based, as you mentioned. Nelson Mandela.
Yes. Mandela's support was consistent and strong. He saw clear parallels with South Africa's fight against apartheid. His quote from 1997 is incredibly powerful, just sums it up. "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians."
Wow. That really encapsulates so much of this history. And these historical threads, from Malcolm X to Mandela, they haven't just faded away. Our sources make it clear they're very much alive today. It's reciprocal, too.
Exactly. It's definitely a two-way street, and we see really striking modern examples. Think back to the Ferguson uprising in 2014. Remember that?
Yeah, vividly.
Palestinian activists were actually tweeting practical advice to Black protesters there, like how to handle tear gas exposure, direct solidarity born from shared lived experience.
That's incredible. Practical help across continents.
Right. And then in 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, our sources noted, people were painting George Floyd murals in Palestine, and there were accounts of Palestinians being attacked by Israeli security forces, crying out, "I can't breathe." It's just that deep resonance again, not just empathy, but shared language of suffering.
It's chilling how those phrases travel. Beyond these really powerful moments, what other ways does this solidarity show up today? Culturally? Organizationally? What do the sources say?
Culturally, you definitely see the symbols being shared. Like Black activists wearing keffiyehs, the Palestinian scarf, as a symbol of resistance. And Palestinian activists adopting the raised fist, the Black Power symbol. Hip-hop is another big space for this, according to sources. You have Black artists, Lupe Fiasco, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Vic Mensa talking about the Palestinian situation in their music. And then Palestinian rappers like MC Abdul or the group Damn. detailing the injustices they face. It's a dialogue happening through music.
A cultural exchange of resistance.
Yeah. And the support flows the other way, too. The sources mention Angela Davis receiving support from Palestinian political prisoners back in the day. And even something like the Hope Flower School in Bethlehem, having a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. hanging prominently in its entrance. It shows that respect and connection.
And what about organizations today? Are there specific Black-led groups carrying this forward?
Oh, definitely. The Movement for Black Lives, M4BL, that big coalition of Black activist groups across the U.S. In their 2016 platform, they explicitly included support for Palestinians. They even used the term apartheid state to describe Israel, which was, quite a statement. And you also have groups like Dream Defenders and Black for Palestine actively working to build and maintain these connections. So it's very much an ongoing, organized effort.
Okay, so it's deep, it's historical, it's contemporary. But as the sources also point out, the solidarity isn't simple or uncomplicated. It faces real challenges, right? Internal divisions, political pressures.
You're absolutely right to raise that. It's definitely complex territory. The sources do highlight, for example, a strain on the sort of historic alliance between some Black and Jewish activists. We have a quote from Bob Kaplan from the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. He expressed concern about a lack of understanding of what Israel is about and how deeply October 7, referring to the Hamas attack and everything after, has affected us. He makes the point that anti-Semitism is incredibly real for American Jews, just as racism is for Black communities.
Acknowledging the distinct traumas on both sides.
Right. But Kaplan also adds, importantly, that many Jews do understand that Black affinity for the Palestinian cause doesn't necessarily mean hostility towards Israel itself. It's nuanced.
So it's not a uniform perspective on either side. And the sources also talk about divisions within the Black community itself over this.
Exactly. That complexity exists internally, too.
Yeah.
There's historical precedent. The sources mention figures like Audre Lorde and June Jordan having different views on Israel back in the early 80s. And today, the sources identify what they call a small but vocal contingent within the Black community who might push back against things like boycotts or use common arguments like, this conflict is ancient, to frame it differently. And it's noted, for instance, that the National Newspaper Publishers Association, a Black press group, declared itself firmly in solidarity with Israel. So yeah, definitely not monolithic. And then there's the political layer, the Democratic Party's handling of this. It's a significant factor mentioned in the sources. There's a suggestion that the party has kind of tried to obfuscate and manipulate the issue, sometimes framing pro-Palestinian voices as just single-issue voters.
Right, minimizing the breadth of concern.
Yeah. And the sources also note this tendency to, quote, use Blackness as a shield by having prominent Black figures like Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield or Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre be the ones defending certain policies related to the conflict. And the potential effect of all this maneuvering, the sources suggest, is confusion, maybe even dampening enthusiasm for voting among some people who feel alienated by it.
Okay, so given all that complexity, the internal divisions, the politics, the shifting ground, what do the numbers actually say? How are perceptions changing? Let's look at that Carnegie Endowment polling. In late October 2023, it found 44% of Black adults were more likely than white or Hispanic adults to say the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. That's quite a difference. But interestingly, at that point, Black Americans weren't necessarily more likely to say the U.S. wasn't supportive enough for Palestinians. And almost half, 48%, felt disconnected from either side. More felt connected to Israelis, 19%, than Palestinians, 9% back then.
That was October 2023. But then fast forward just a few months to March 2024.
And there's a big shift.
A really significant shift. Now, a clear majority of Black Americans, 68%, supported the U.S. calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. That's up from 43% in October. Huge jump. Support for putting human rights conditions on U.S. military aid to Israel also went up to 59%. And crucially, that feeling of connection changed dramatically. The number of Black Americans feeling connected to the Palestinian plight doubled from 9% to 18%. And overall, more Black Americans now said they felt connected to Palestinians, 45%, than to Israelis, 40%. That's a reversal from October.
That's a major turnaround in just a few months. What about views on Biden's handling of it?
Well, for most Black Americans, 66%, their view hadn't changed. But among younger Black voters and independents, they were more likely to say their view had worsened.
Okay. And one more point from that poll, the International Court of Justice finding on genocide.
Yes. If the ICJ finds Israel committed genocide, 51% of Black respondents said the U.S. should impose sanctions. So majority support for potential consequences based on international law findings.
These numbers really show how dynamic things are, how quickly events can reshape these feelings of solidarity.
Absolutely. It underlines this idea, quoted from historian Robin D.G. Kelly in our sources, that solidarity is not a market exchange. It's not about keeping score. It really reinforces that, for many Black Americans, as the sources show, there's this perception of deep links between the U.S. military-industrial complex and Israel's. Between U.S. policing and Israeli security methods, it's about recognizing these shared systems of power, how they operate globally, and finding common cause and challenging them.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, what we've really traced is how Black-Palestinian solidarity is so much more than just, a hashtag or a recent trend. It's this deep, evolving connection. It's rooted in decades of shared history, shared experiences of oppression. It's been shaped by major figures and movements, and it continues to play out today in culture, in politics, in activism.
And maybe the most profound takeaway, connecting all these threads, comes from a perspective highlighted in our sources. This idea that, quote, liberation for us living in the American South will happen simultaneously with the liberation of the people of Palestine and other oppressed people around the globe. It really frames liberation not just as parallel struggles, but as fundamentally interconnected.
That's a powerful thought to end on. So for you listening, maybe the question to ponder is this. What impact does this kind of long-standing, evolving solidarity actually have on how we understand human rights and justice globally? Especially now, when we see conflicts play out in real time online? And how might you continue to explore the complexities, the nuances of struggles that seem distant but might be more connected than we think? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.